Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. Tonight I want to share with you guys my plans for a reading event that is coming up in December. This event is called Ghost of Christmas Past, Resurrecting a Tradition. Now, if you've been around my channel for a while, this event might seem a little out of character for me, but I will explain why this one interests me so much. I'm going to be joining Vin at Revenant Reads along with all of his co-hosts to do the Ghost of Christmas Past event, to read along, readathon, reading events. So this is a reading event that goes on all through the month of December. I'll put Vin's link in the description box along with the links to his co-hosts so you can check out everybody's introduction videos. But I decided to participate in this. It sounded so interesting to me. If I would have gone into a career rather than into a life of a homemaking mother and homeschooling mom, I think that I would have gone into cultural anthropology. That is what I went to college for when I started out, and I am just so interested in different cultures and the way that they do things and why they do things and their stories and their histories. And so even though I didn't go to school or I haven't had a career for that particular line of study, it is definitely something that I have done a lot of study research on over the years. So for the Victorians in particular, I have been studying the Victorian era for about 12 years now, pretty steadily and pretty heavily. I've made many trips over to England to study the Regency and Victoria eras and some of the literature and history and people. And so anyway, the whole idea of this reading event really appealed to me because I have some questions. So people say that the Victorians were obsessed with death, and I don't necessarily think they were obsessed with it. I think it's more of just a closeness to it that we don't understand, right? Because a lot of the things that have to do with death and dying, we tend to allow the professionals to take care of, right? When our loved ones are sick, they go to a hospital. When they die, they go to a mortuary. You know, when they are to be buried, it's someone else who actually does the physical act of that, and all these things, right? There's all kinds of different things that we could go into. And so I don't necessarily think they had an obsession. I think that they just had an understanding and a acceptance that we lack and that we just don't know how to deal with, right? We don't know how to wrap our heads around. So how all this pertains to the reading event. So this event is to read ghost stories, whether they be Victorian ghost stories, modern ghost stories specifically surrounding the time of Christmas or just whenever. But the idea comes from the fact that the Victorians told ghost stories at Christmas time. And so I have a lot of questions about this, right? One is, what about Christmas time made them want to tell spooky stories? I have some theories. I'm going to read a few things and try them out and see if my theories are correct. But I want to look at that and figure out, why did the Victorians see Christmas as a spooky season? Did they see it as a spooky season? And if so, why? Why did they tell spooky stories during that time? And then secondly, what did the Victorians find to be scary? Because I've read quite a few of these spooky Gothic tales coming out of the Regency and Victorian eras, and I'm just not getting it. I'm not seeing the spookiness. The group read for this reading event is The Old Nurse's Story by Elizabeth Gaskell. If you remember, last winter I read Elizabeth Gaskell's Gothic tales, and I was not impressed. I don't know if you guys remember me ranting about her Gothic tales, but I just didn't find them to be spooky, weird, gothic-y, whatever. I wasn't getting it. The only one I really liked was Lois the Witch. And that's just because I find that time period of the Salem Witch Trials very interesting as well. And I thought it was a very compassionately told story. But anyway, I do want to say that I feel like when I was reading through this, I probably was just trying to get done because I didn't have a good first impression, and so I just wanted to get done. So there's probably some stuff that I missed. I will admit that. So anyway, I'm going to go through and read The Old Nurse's Story with the group, and then I'm going to read some other things, and I'm going to try to answer those questions. Why was this a spooky time of year for them? And what did they find spooky? And why? Why were they afraid of things that we may not be afraid of, and why are we afraid of things that they may not be afraid of? Those are some of my, questions that I have. So we'll see if my assumptions are true, and if so, why. So here are some of the things that I am planning on reading for the first part of December. Again, outside of my normal, normal genres of reading, but I think that they're going to be good and helpful for this little challenge I'm putting myself through. So I will read from the Elizabeth Gaskell book, at least that one, The Old Nurse's Story. I've just finished The Christmas Carol last night. I read through this probably for maybe the 12th or 13th time. I think I have on record of having read it 11 times, according to my Goodreads and my bookcrossing.com notes. But I know that I had read it at least one more time besides that. So I know I've read it at least 12 times. But anyway, when I read through it this last weekend, it was so compelling. I cried, and I don't think I've ever cried with this story, because it's one of those stories, I don't know about you, but I feel like we encounter it like all growing up. There was the Mickey Mouse Christmas Carol on the Disney Channel, and then there was the several different adaptations. You had the Bill Murray movie about Scrooge, right? It's just like in our culture all over the place here in the US. So I can't even imagine how many different references there are over in England, since the story does take place in London. But it's one of those things where you think you know the story, so you just kind of skim through, right? But this time I was very careful to go line by line and pay attention to as many details as I could, and there was so much in there that I missed. I have pages of notes, and I'm actually going to do a total analytical video on this story. But this is such a redemptive, just wonderful story about love and about acceptance of your own self, and just loving yourself, before others can love you, and all that kind of stuff. And people think it's a story about money. It's not a story about money. It's just a beautiful story about how to treat people. But anyway, so this is one, though, that does feature 4 ghosts, right? And so this is a great Victorian ghost story. And Charles Dickens' first ghost story that he released at Christmas time, from what I understand. And he released several more. If you're interested in a reading event involving Charles Dickens' Christmas stories, you can check out the one that Katie is doing at Books and Things. I actually was going to start that out, and so I read this kind of earlier than I normally do for the year, and this because I was going to participate. And then I decided to just go ahead and do this other one instead, because I really just have some questions I want to answer, and I think it's a good study. But anyway, I'll put a link for her video on her Dickens Christmas read-along in the description box in case you guys want to check that out. All right, so I've already read that one, but that will be a good study for me. And then I found a couple more. I didn't really want to buy anything for this study because like I said, this isn't really, I probably won't keep them because it's not really something that I read a lot. But I did have a couple on my shelves already. So, and I did buy a couple. I'll talk to you about it in a second. Okay, anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. But The Hound of the Baskerville, I think that this is a ghost story. I've never read it, but I think that it is, and so I'm gonna read it and see. I hope that it is, because it is a short book, but I still don't want to waste my time. Not that reading Sherlock Holmes would be a waste, just that that's not my goal right now, right? I really would like to finish up this study like in the first couple of weeks of December. And so this one is pretty short, and I've never read it. I've never read any Sherlock Holmes. So if it's not a ghost story and I'm going to be sorely disappointed, tell me now so I can find something else to take its place. I didn't want to read too much on it, because I don't want spoilers. So anyway, okay. So there's that one. And then I have this compilation of Edgar Allan Poe stories. And while his stories are all spooky, weird, gross, gruesome, creepy, they're not all ghost stories. But I think this one, is it Ligeia? Ligeia, I think is how you say it. I think it's a ghost story. I was kind of like Googling what are, Poe's ghost stories. So this one, I think Ligeia is one. So that is at least one story that I'm going to read from this book, that Edgar Allan Poe, it's a compilation of all of his stories and poems. Okay, so those are the things that I'm going to look at along with the Elizabeth Gaskell story. As I'm reading through those books, I'm going to ask myself some questions. I'm going to ask, what role does the ghost play? Is the ghost evil? Is the character afraid of the ghost, and why? And then ultimately the questions that I'm trying to answer here are, why did the Victorians see Christmas as a spooky season? If they did, or why did they tell spooky stories during that time? I guess I'm making an assumption there. And then what makes a story spooky from their perspective? What were they trying to accomplish? Were they trying to scare themselves? Were they stories of warning? Or did they see them completely different than we would, and they're actually stories of comfort? That's something else I want to find out. So then, as a sort of comparative study, I'm also going to read the two scariest books that I can remember from my childhood. You're probably going to laugh. I want to show you. So I scare easily, apparently. And I think it's because the story can be like this, but my imagination is like this, right? And so I just take that story and I just go with it. And so I do get scared easily, I think, when I'm reading something that is intended to scare me. It works usually, except all the Victorian things I've read. But the modern things, yeah. So I don't really read them because I don't want to be freaked out. But when I was younger, really young, 8 and 9, I was reading Stephen King. They were freaking me out. Later in my teen years, when I started going to church and stuff, I read Frank Peretti, which was kind of like the Christian Stephen King light. And they freaked me out a little as well. But there's two specific books I remember from my childhood that scared me to death. All right, one of them is this compilation of stories. My brother and I had this book and we would read it all the time. I think we stole it from my older cousin. I'm not exactly sure how we came across this book because I don't know that my mom would buy it for us. However, when I was looking for it online, I found that it was published. It was published in 1959. And this copy is from 1979, so Mom, maybe it was hers. But I highly doubt it. I think we stole it from my cousin Larry Dean. Anyway, this book is full of some really freaky stories, and I have not read any of them since I was about 10 years old, probably. I couldn't even remember the title of it. I was texting my brother, do you remember that story about the thing under the bed? And what was that book? And he couldn't remember either because he hadn't thought about it in decades. And then I remembered and I found it. So I'm going to read through it and I'm probably going to send it to him. So that was one super scary story that I read as a kid. And then the other one, if you are an 80s kid, you know this story. Wait Till Helen Comes by Mary Downing Hahn. This freaks me right out. I have read this story so many times. The last time I read this story, I was doing kind of a little thing over a summer where I was reading all of the books that I remembered from my later grade school years, chapter books, scholastic stuff, Apple, Avon, Camelot, whatever, all of those kind of chapter books like this. And so I read this. Okay, that was it 2020? The summer of 2020? I was at my mom's house for a couple of weeks, I think is when I last read this. Okay, only 4 years ago. I was 41 and scared myself to death. So it's just a really freaky book. And so I'm going to put myself through the agony again of reading Wait Till Helen Comes. I have read this book probably 50 or 60 times in my life. When I was in grade school, my friend and I would just take turns checking it out from the library every other day. We were obsessed with this book. And so, yes, I'm going to read these two. And then because what I want to do is find out why these scare me, but the other things don't scare me. Why do these books written for children, and I'm not saying that the authors are, shallow and juvenile, but they're written in a shallow and juvenile way because they're for kids. why do they freak me out so bad when I'm reading all these other stories that are written and just a little with more depth and, you know, for adults? Why are they not doing a thing? So I want to see what the difference is here. And it's just a little study, just a little cultural anthropological study on the, you know, what makes people afraid, and why did they seem so much more comfortable with the idea of, you know, the afterlife or of a spirit coming back from the afterlife than we are today. So there is my announcement video for the Ghosts of Christmas Past Resurrecting a Tradition reading event. Be sure and check out the host and all the co-hosts down in the description box if this sounds like something that you are interested in. I will probably just do 2 more videos in December on this topic. I will do one analysis video on the Christmas Carol, and then I will do one video to kind of follow up with you guys on what I discovered in my study and what kind of answers I found to my questions. Hope everybody's having a great day. I will see you soon. Bye-bye.